Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 10. 10, double digits now. Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. Tonight, we're going to be discussing The Man in the Hat, which you'll find out is sort of like the final boss of hypnagogic hallucinations, which of course occur during sleep paralysis. After that, we'll get into some nightmares from Reddit, both the nightmares and then perhaps a few from the dream interpretation subreddit. And then to finish, we have received a viewer-submitted email for tonight from our friend Michelle. So we'll get into that towards the end. But first things first, let's take a look at the presentation. Perfect. All right, so as mentioned before, The Man in the Hat is what we're discussing tonight. So, The Man in the Hat is primarily something seen in sleep paralysis. It's a common variation of the sleep paralysis demon or the shadow people that are often seen in hypnagogic hallucinations. And, right, it's common to see, in hypnagogic hallucinations, a shadow person at the foot of your bed or something else like that. But it's a little bit less common to see the Man in the Hat. But there are still many people who see the Man in the Hat. So many people who suffer from the hypnagogic hallucinations and have seen the Man in the Hat describe him as a shadow person, but he wears a wide-brimmed hat. And sometimes he's seen in a trench coat, usually seen in a trench coat, and sometimes also with glowing red eyes, but other times no. Although this is likely to be just like any other hypnagogic hallucination, and you do see the same things in terms of the other symptoms of sleep paralysis that you would normally see, so like pressure on the chest, difficulty breathing, and sometimes that can be manifested as the Man in the Hat pressing down on your chest. But it's also said that the Man in the Hat, as opposed to other shadow beings, is particularly terrifying. Also, he'll stay longer than other shadow people within the hypnagogic hallucination. So he'll actually lengthen, if you see him, they say that the amount of time that you are in sleep paralysis increases, so he hangs on for longer. Also, very freaky, when most shadow people disappear at the end of a hypnagogic hallucination, they simply cease to exist. They just vanish suddenly. The Man in the Hat, however, is often described as floating above the ground and flying away, or he'll actually just turn and walk away at the end of sleep paralysis. He doesn't just abruptly disappear like other shadow people. So he's got his own sort of unique exit. And there's accounts of the Man in the Hat from all sorts of different countries all over the world. But it's unknown why he's wearing a wide-brimmed hat. A psychologist, Christopher French, who is a professor at Goldsmiths University of London, has suggested it could be because of Freddy Krueger, who of course is the villain in Nightmare on Elm Street, wears a similar looking brimmed hat, and that people could be subconsciously making an association between the movie and what they're experiencing in sleep paralysis. But although he may just be another hypnagogic hallucination, some go deeper into trying to understand him, and there's something of a folklore, a modern folklore, around the details of the Man in the Hat, created since the age of the internet. So another interesting thing is that he can appear in nightmares as well as sleep paralysis. So instead of a trench coat, some people will also report seeing him wearing old-timey clothing or a cape. And he's always reported as being at least 6 feet tall, but not superhumanly tall. Not like 10 feet or 12 feet. It's within the realm of human possibility. And other than reports where he is said to have red eyes, the man in the hat has no facial descriptors usually, although, as you'll see in some of the case studies I provide at the end of this, some people do see him with facial descriptors, but the general consensus is that he doesn't have anything discernible other than the eyes. And generally his face is shrouded by his hat, so his hat will cast a shadow over his face, and you won't actually be able to see what it looks like. There have also been reports that the hatted man has a gold watch, which is attached to his belt by a chain, and he will occasionally look at it. The hat man will usually just watch you in sleep paralysis, or lean over the edge of your bed. Or in nightmares, some report being attacked by him. Also in sleep paralysis, people report being attacked by him as that pressure on the chest feeling builds. They, might imagine or hallucinate that he's pushing down on them. In nightmares and also in real life, people claim that they can see him in mirrors behind them sometimes. And some believe that he is a demon sent to bring those who are about to die to hell. After the bedroom in sleep paralysis, the second most common place to see him in nightmares is in basements, and he's also sometimes accompanied by other shadow people, but in those contexts he behaves as their leader, and people also report feeling an additional sense of glee from the hatted man as opposed to other shadow beings as he torments them. So, as mentioned, some believe that it's a demon sent to bring those who are about to die into hell. There's a story about this. So a suicidal man who woke to find himself in a hospital and the hat man close by, so a false awakening. And according to the story, the hatted man quickly disappeared after the man woke up, but not before saying, "I almost had you." Some believe that the Hat Man is a physical entity and emits a very powerful negative energy and feeds off people's fear. People report being able to instantly identify him as evil in dreams and in sleep paralysis, and being sure that he wanted to kill them and was enjoying their fear. Not only the Hat Man, but shadow people in general, some believe to be interdimensional beings that visit humanity, but they are only partially visible since they are on a different vibration. It is also believed by some that the Hatted Man and other shadow people are actually the shadows of people who are astrally projecting, so individuals who are asleep and are having an out-of-body experience appear as shadow people to others. And perhaps in this case, the Hatted Man is an extremely accomplished astral projector, as so many have claimed to have seen him. Also, as mentioned before, some claim that he's a demon, and there are other theories which include aliens, time travelers, and ghosts, as well as, of course, a hallucination or a figment of the imagination. The photo that you see here, this is actually claimed to be an actual photo of the Hat Man, but I don't know a lot about its origin. You can barely make it out. There is some facial features showing there too, and then just the hat. But other than that, it's a dark cloak, and you can't really make out too much. So one of the things that's most terrifying about the Hat Man is the fact that so many people over the world claim to have seen him, despite his somewhat unusual accessory. In some cases, he appears to several people in the same family around the same time. In 2001, the subject of shadow people was first introduced to mainstream media via Coast to Coast AM, and after the broadcast, many people sent in drawings they had seen and shared stories about their own experiences with shadow people. Author and strange encounter enthusiast Heidi Hollis noted in 2008 that there was a commonly seen shadow person that she named the Hat Man, and people all over the world claimed to have been visited by him as well. No one expected so many people to have experiences with the Hat Man or shadow people, but the similarity of people's stories has given the creepy dark man a lot of popularity and credibility for a lot of people. so the fact that so many have seen him gives him some legitimacy. Lots of witnesses have met the Hat Man when they were children and kept the stories to themselves for many years, either because they didn't want to be thought of as crazy or they didn't rationally believe the story themselves. So, if you recall episode 6, we discussed what the meaning of shadow people was in dreams, and just as a recap, it could be doubt or uncertainty about the future or experiencing significant changes in your life. And obviously the Hatted Man is one of these dark figures. So we also know that in sleep paralysis itself, it can be more common when you are stressed or when your sleep cycle is perturbed. You can be more likely to have sleep paralysis. And that kind of goes hand in hand with this thought that's also part of the Hat Man's folklore, that he's said to appear in times of trauma, aggression, or other negative emotional disturbances, which checks out. There have also been some depictions of the Hat Man in popular culture. This image on the right, this is from the show Fringe, and it's an episode about observers who appear in photographs throughout time, wearing long coats and brimmed hats. And although this is not the Hatted Man, like in popular culture, I like the show Fringe, and this Hatted Man reminded me of these guys, just in the way that they seem to be omnipresent across time and throughout different cultures. In this show, though, the observers are not malicious, and they're just sort of observing the timeline. But yeah, I was just reminded of that. And then there was also a Canadian horror film made about the Hat Man called The Man in the Shadows, which I've alluded to on the left there. And so this is about... the plot centers around a prescription drug-addicted newlywed photographer who appears to be stalked by a dark man in a brimmed hat who follows her from her nightmares into reality. And Rachel is aided by William, who has been investigating the Hat Man phenomenon. So I haven't seen this one, but I ought to check it out, being Canadian myself. Okay, so some of these accounts are pretty freaky. Like, I'll link at the end of the presentation to where you can read more of them, but I found some of the ones that freaked me out the most. So I was 7 years old in 1988. I had recurring nightmares of the Hat Man. It would start with me lying on my back in bed, believing I was awake. I would feel a sudden presence in the room, behind me, but I was not able to move or scream. As the presence approached, the fear would intensify. And when the presence reached my bed, I was able to see him, standing over my bed. The presence wore a black top hat and a black cape, but I couldn't make out his face. The shadow from his black hat was too dark. He would reach down and throw me somehow into the air, at which point a horrendous nightmare would begin. Sorry. This would happen most nights. I would cry at bedtime and beg my mum, "Don't let me have a bad dream tonight," every night. This went on, I suppose, for what seemed like a year. The dream always began in the same way, with the Hat Man throwing me into a nightmare, but the preceding nightmare was always horrific. Monsters, loved ones acting evil or being hurt. This became such a big deal for me and my family. I remember my mum even consulting the doctor about tips to reduce nightmares. After many, many nights of this same experience, I discovered I could control what happened in the nightmares, mainly by closing my eyes as tight as I could and opening them again, to which I would open them in real life and then wake up. I could never wake myself up when the Hat Man was present, however, but as soon as he threw me up, I would wake myself up. Slowly, I stopped experiencing the Hat Man. I have never forgotten my experiences or the Hat Man. It was only as an adult I stumbled across information about this phenomenon. So here, it sounds like they are having sleep paralysis before falling asleep. We know that it can happen when waking up or when falling asleep. And this individual is then getting thrown into nightmares by his sleep paralysis demon, which in this case is the Hat Man. And I mean, it's no surprise that they can't really wake themselves up when they're in sleep paralysis, because they're in the process of falling asleep, but then as soon as they're asleep, they can wake themselves up. Still really freaky. Here's another account. The first time I seen this figure, I was about 16. I was lying in bed and I couldn't sleep. From where my bed was positioned, I could see down the hallway. I saw him standing down the hallway outside my brother's room. He was facing my brother's bedroom door, and I was looking at a side profile. He was tall, wearing a long trench coat and a fedora-like hat. He had no distinguishable features. It was dark as the hallway light was on, and yet I couldn't see any features like mouth or eyes. I was frozen with fear, and after a minute or so, he just walked into my brother's room and out of view. I lay terrified, waiting for something to happen, because I just knew it was something more realistic than a ghost. After about 15 minutes of lying, terrified, I got up the courage to go wake my parents. Their bedroom was just past my brother's, so as I was passing, I looked around the room as quickly as I could. My brother was still sound asleep, and no Hat Man in sight. My dad searched the house, making sure I hadn't seen an intruder, and I was just shrugged off that I was seeing things. For months later, I saw the exact same thing. He was standing in the same place, and walked away in the same way. Until one night, he was standing at the foot of my bed. He wasn't looking at me, but looking down towards the floor. Frozen with fear, I shouted for my parents as loud as I could, and in that moment, and again, he just slowly walked away out of view. My parents again thought nothing of it. One night, I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting down at the end of my bed. Over in the corner there, he was. I wasn't sleeping because he had me feeling terrified, but then I started seeing him in broad daylight. For example, I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich, and from the side of my eye, I saw someone walking across the hallway. I wasn't expecting anyone to be home, so when I focused and realized it was him, I had never felt fear like that. I kept watching him, and he just walked into the living room and out of sight. I was so terrified, and I locked myself in the kitchen with my dog and a knife. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, etc., but this is too real. I'm 20 now, and even thinking about him terrifies me. I was telling a family member one night, and she even thought it was strange for me to admit to seeing something like that, and for some reason, I thought just to Google what I had seen, and a bunch of websites came up. Turns out I'm not the only one who's seen this, which makes it actually more terrifying to me. Rightly so. Here's a shorter account. Unlike the few stories I read, I saw the Hat Man when I was much older. I was 53 years old. My wife and I came home from dinner one Friday night in October. I was sitting on the couch watching TV and was starting to get sleepy. I told my wife I was going out for a walk to wake up, and as I was returning to my house, I saw a man approaching me in the distance. He was wearing all black in a style of clothes that reminded me of Sherlock Holmes. I thought it peculiar and stopped at the bottom of my driveway and watched him as he walked closer. It was starting to get dark and the street lights were on, but there was still some light in the sky. He stepped off of the sidewalk and onto the street under a light about 30 yards from me. He turned and faced me and just stood there. I realized he wasn't human, and I thought about running inside. Instead, I decided to get a closer look. I said a quick prayer, asking God to have my back. I took about 3 steps towards him, and the Hat Man ran. He went from 0 to about 25 miles per hour instantly. When he ran, his foot speed didn't seem to match his speed, and there was no sound from his footsteps. That's a freaky one. I liked that bit at the end. And here's the last account in the presentation. It was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I was always fascinated with ghost stories, horror films, mysteries, even strong spiritual connections. I can honestly say I never truly believed in ghosts, though. There was always too much of a question there. If you ever have an experience like this, you will never question again, as it opens up all kinds of doorways and thoughts on the supernatural. In my house, a 1970s southern home, I have felt a presence before. It often is negative, but has also been angelic after my mother passed. There were little things that happened when me and my sister were young. We shared a room together. I had seen a wolf-like creature standing by her nightstand with neon green glowing eyes, and another time she saw an angel watching me as I slept. Those visions faded with time and age. One night, just a few years ago, I had fallen asleep in my bedroom. I felt something was watching me. My eyes flew open, and standing near the foot of my bed, kind of at the side, was a man watching me. He had beady, piercing black eyes. He was old, but had no wrinkles, white hair, and a white short beard. He wore what appeared to be a black trench coat and a rounded, long-brim Amish-looking hat, or sharp-brimmed vintage fedora. His look was a dull, stoic, slightly sad, and intrigued by me somehow. Menacing because of it. I got the feeling that he had been there before. After several good seconds of realizing this was in fact real, I let out a blood-curdling scream. I ran up the back of the bed and against the wall, and he vanished before me. I turned on the night lamp and grabbed my phone, went outside my room and called my sister. What is curious is that my mother passed a year later, or in the same month. I often think he was a foreteller of doom, or just a curious entity that wants something, but is unsure of how to attain it. It helps to know other people have seen this man. I would like to talk to someone who's actually seen this pale man's face directly, because I have a few I've read saw him much close range. I can still see him right now in my mind. These all give me goosebumps to read. Again, final boss of hypnagogic hallucinations. And if you want to read more of these sorts of accounts of the Hat Man, check out thehatmanproject.com, where I found a lot of these comments. There's many, many more there. But that'll do it for this presentation. Art Bell. Yeah, that's the host of Coast to Coast, right? Is that show still on? Did account 3 see him while awake, or was that a dream? Yeah, it's supposed to be while awake. I mean, in that case, the one where he took steps towards him and the guy ran away, I mean, that could have just been a dude. But I mean, it's still odd behavior for a dude, you know? Fringe, yeah. Fringe is a good show. Recommend it. It's sci-fi, though. It's not necessarily horror, but it's got that good spook feel to it. Yeah, hope everyone's enjoyed that presentation. Yeah, that was, I don't know, that was one of the most goosebump-inducing ones for me so far. But, you know what I want to do now is I want to read some nightmares from Reddit. And here we go. This is a post by a user named bean_ssbcomp. Excuse me. The post is titled, "Years ago, I had a nightmare that continues to bother me." The post reads, "I dreamt I was in my parents' house playing some kind of card game with my siblings and friends. We sat in a circle on the floor, and an area where a long, dark hallway was visible. It was my turn to draw a card, and what I saw on the card still haunts me to this day. On the card was a green Kirby, yes, Kirby from the games, that had the most terrifying, horrific, disgusting face I have ever seen. I cannot describe how awful it was. Once I saw it, I went deaf and began screaming. My friends were trying to talk to me, ask me what was wrong, but all I could hear was an intense, high-pitched ringing in my ears. I fell on my side, clutching my ears, still screaming from terror, when then, in the hallway, I saw that same green Kirby, with the same disgusting face, standing there in the darkness, staring at me. That's when the nightmare ended. I know it sounds really, really dumb, and probably comical, but honestly, my greatest fear is that someday I will see that green Kirby in real life and go deaf. I like that one. For some reason, when he, like, all, I get a feeling that it's a he, but it could be a she. Doesn't matter. Whoever it is. When they describe, like, they first describe that terrifying, horrific, disgusting face on the Kirby, I felt it somehow. Like, I felt like I understood exactly, like, what he meant. I've never seen anything like that, though, in a dream or otherwise, but, yeah, very freaky. Like, I did feel like I understood it somehow. But I wish that, you know, I could see a drawing of it or something like that, or just to, like, confirm. But it's interesting also that he's afraid he'll go deaf. I wonder what that could possibly mean. Like, if we're thinking about it from, you know, a dream interpretation perspective. Go deaf. Usually, I mean, we see people go mute or they're unable to move. And that would indicate that they are afraid of talking about something, right? That's what we usually see. Or they're keeping something bottled up inside. I wonder if there's, like, if we were to flip that, right? Because in this case, it's a fear of going deaf. I wonder if there's something, you know, maybe some disturbing thing in life that he associates with that game, or that he associates with, like, Super Smash Bros. Or some guy who's into, like, something like that. And there's something that he doesn't want to hear from that guy. Maybe he's, like, blocking it out. They're blocking it out, whoever it is. But I liked that one. Somehow I felt it, you know. Here we go. This is a post by a user named That One Columbia Guy. The post is titled, Nightmare or Night Terror? You decide. The post reads, I slept for what must have been only an hour and 30 minutes, taking a nap break from studying when I had one of the worst nightmares I've had in a while. It was more like a series of small nightmares, one right after the other. The thing was consistent about all these mini nightmares was that I was always bound to my bed by some entity with long arms and fingers. The entity would be trying to harm me in some way by chewing me from behind. And squeezing my head. Sorry, I'm not sure what that word is supposed to be. I fought violently in order to escape its clutches, and always ended up hurting it by poking it in the face or something. Once that happened, that mini nightmare would end, but would be replaced by a similar mini nightmare, involving a similar entity. I don't know if this was a series of nightmares or a prolonged night terror, but when I woke up, I was short of breath. My heart was racing. I'm posting here so I don't forget of how much of a drag this experience was. I'm actually going to go ahead and say that it wasn't a night terror, and there's two reasons for that. First of all, because your heart was racing. I mean, I guess if it's a night terror, your heart would probably be racing, but in general, in REM sleep, that's when your heart would be more likely to be racing. And more importantly, because at the very beginning, you say, literally, I must have slept for what must have been an hour and 30 minutes. 90 minutes? 90 minutes is the length of a sleep cycle, which means you were at the end of that sleep cycle when you had that dream, which means that you were in REM sleep, which means that by definition it can't be a night terror, which happens in deep sleep. So pretty sure it's a nightmare rather than a night terror. In terms of what's actually happening to you, it almost sounds like a hypnagogic hallucination. It almost sounds like sleep paralysis, where you're waking up and then you're having some of those hallucination things. But I think instead it sounds more like a recurring false awakening. So you can have these loops of false awakenings in nightmares. And that sounds more to me like what's going on here. Because you believe maybe that you're waking up. Because it sounds like in the nightmare, you're in your bed. So you're probably like, imagine that you're awaking, and then you're in this horrible situation. So I would say it's probably nightmare, and it is false awakenings rather than being sleep paralysis or night terror. In terms of what it means, that's tough. I mean, like the entity's description. I mean, like the only entities that I can really analyze are the shadow figures, because those are the ones that we have some, like literature on what those mean. And I mean, we can take a look at what that is, right? But I don't think that it will answer your question. But as you can see, I increased the length of our dream interpretation chart, by the way. But dark figures just mean doubt or uncertainty about your future, or you're experiencing a significant change in your life. And if it's recurring, that just means that maybe you're resisting that change. So that could be it. Although, again, this doesn't really strike me as being a typical dark figure. That's the best I got. And let's get into another one. This is a post by a username _yes_noob. The post is titled, "I've been having a sequence of weird nightmares about a hotel." The post reads, "So I don't remember exactly the other dreams, except one where I went in the supermarket during the day. But this one was different. It was night, and me and my friend from that hotel that we both lived in as neighbors had to go out of the hotel to get some air. Excuse me. Since his mom had obligated him. I went with him, but when we left our hotel doors, one of the creepiest creatures of nightmares I had was there. I nicknamed it the Spinning Head. And I know it's a silly name, but crap, that was terrifying. It was black and white, decapitated head that spun while playing classical music, and it followed and murdered people by the sound of their footsteps. So me and my friend went by really slowly, but while going down I accidentally made a loud step, and the noise became louder. Then, while we were going through the last staircase, my friend stepped too loud, and at that point I kinda became blind for a bit, but since we were close to the door, my friend went running as fast as he could while pushing me, and after we came through from the door, my vision came back, and we locked the door as fast as possible. Then, my dad asked what the hell was happening, and we explained everything, and proved to my dad by putting his ear to the door to listen to the classical music of the Spinning Head. Then I asked where my dad's roommate was, and he said in the garage, and then I said crap, since at night the garage has the most dangerous spirits, and I knew that since my friend had documented it to me. I emphasized that wrong, but I think you get it. Then the dream ended, where we were discussing how to leave that hotel, and the plan being waiting until the day outside. Waiting until it was day outside the hotel where we were, since the spirits don't appear during the day, and my dad had come to the hotel from going to groceries that day. Now I'm waiting for the continuation of that dream, since it repeats like every single week, but with more stuff to it. That was my dream. Goodbye." Nice sign off there. So that's kind of interesting that they're expecting to have the dream again. That's not what we usually see, is it? Like we've heard before about people who have nightmares that pick up where they left off, and this person seems to be, well, I guess they have had it before, but we didn't really get the the previous night to get us caught up to where they're at. The monster itself is certainly interesting, as other people are commenting in the thread. a black and white head that's disembodied. It floats and it spins. Maybe it represents like a statue or something, or antiquity. Maybe it represents the past or your ancestors or something coming to get you. If you're being too loud, maybe you got yelled at by old people when you were a kid for being too loud. I did sometimes, and not a good feeling. Maybe I carry some of that with me to this day as well. Again, it's not a monster that I can analyze from my dream chart. It's very unique. And the fact that it's taking place in a hotel, I'm not sure what that could mean. But that's interesting. Let's check out another one. Because, well, hang on a second. So, like, the hotel, it's not taking place in your house, and we know that the house is supposed to represent the psyche of the self. So maybe the hotel means that this is taking, like, or is associated with some other individual. I might be grasping at straws. I tried my best. You see, I even went back to it. I tried so hard. That's the best I can do. Let's read it a different one. Maybe we can do better on another one. Whoops. This is a post by a user named Modest Empress. The post is titled, Deceased, let me try that again, Deceased like walking body in nightmare. The post reads, Hey, just had a scary dream. This is what it was about. My sister came home from going shopping or something, and we wanted to watch a movie. The house I live in now was not the house in the dream. It was much bigger and more modern looking and very white. She was standing about 10 feet away from the outside of the bathroom. While we were talking about what movie to watch, someone who looks just like her from the back walks out of the bathroom, right past her and down the hallway. They have their hair up in a towel and they're on their phone, but I never saw their face. My sister can't see the person at all. She usually gets freaked out easily, so I was like, I don't want to scare you, but I just imagined you walking right past yourself heading into your room. Are you planning on taking a shower or something? She's like, what? No. In the middle of her saying it, another figure walks out of the bathroom. Same thing. They're walking towards the end of the hall, and I can't see their face, 'cause I'm behind them, but they look just like my sister from the back. However, this time, my sister can see the thing walking by her, and unlike the first time, it just stops walking. We stand there in silence, all three of us. We don't see its face. It's turned away, staring at the wall, until I say, Excuse me? Who are you? And then the thing turns around slowly, and I see this pale being. It looked nothing like my sister. It had a very blackened left eye and a bruised mouth. I don't know, it looked deceased. I woke up as soon as it turned around. I was dripping in sweat. I don't know why the hell I just had that dream. But I had a feeling before bed that I would have a nightmare, which is crazy. That is interesting. She had a feeling before bed that she was going to have a nightmare. I assume it's a she because the name is Empress, but it could be wrong. But yeah, I mean, usually, so there's a few different ways of looking at this from the way I see it. So normally, when you see a dead relative in a dream, well, like if we look over here at seeing the dead, like third from the top. So seeing a dead person that you don't know is different from seeing a dead person that you know. So at first, you think it's a dead person you know. Well, you don't think it's a dead person. You think it's your sister. But essentially, if you see a dead person that you know, it can mean that you feel guilty about not having reached out to them for a while, or that there's some tumultuous aspect of your relationship with them that's not, it's not going super smooth at the moment. Also, seeing a dead person can indicate that you're struggling with grief if you don't know them. I'm not sure if in the end when she says, this person was definitely not my sister. I'm not sure if this means because she was dead, like it was clearly not her because she was dead, or if it was like objectively not her and she had been incorrect. In which case, your interpretation of whether the dead person was your sister or not changes. The other thing, though, is that I wonder if, maybe you had a fight with your sister before it, or you left things on like bad terms before, because you said that you felt like you were going to have a nightmare, which is unusual, right? We're not normally able to predict these things, but obviously nightmares are a way for our brain to process some of the things that we're in turmoil over. So it'd be interesting to get a better sense from you of what that might be. I really wanted to read this one here. So this is actually from the Dream Interpretation subreddit, but it was just very freaky and unusual. This is a post by a user named King Twibs. The post is titled, "I dreamt I transformed into a horse." The post reads, "It honestly was pretty normal at first, where I was just driving down a weird, bizarro version of our lake house, to a weirdo, bizarro version of our lake house. Then I parked the car near a horse field near Cowboy Church and got on my knees. The first thing that happened is my arms and legs started morphing in very graphic, eldritch way into a horse's legs. It really effing hurt, and I felt an eternity of pain, if that makes any sense. Then my butt expanded in the same morphing way into a horse, behind slowly moving up my body. It eventually made it up to my head, and I became a full horse. The pain went away, and the dream went third person, where I ate grass for a solid 30 minutes before I woke up in a cold sweat, with my small headache and then that Tylenol fixed. Some extra context is that I ate a lot of sugar beforehand and mixed my day and night up. Went to bed at 7 a.m., woke up at 11 p.m. Does this mean anything? It feels like a bit more to me, but like I'm unsure." I have no idea. I have no idea what that means. Let me know in the chat if anyone has had an experience of morphing. Sorry, just the comment in the chat. Let me know in the chat if anyone's had an experience of morphing into an animal or some other monster. To be honest with you, Diane, I'm surprised. I think that's a Family Guy quote from the chat there. But I don't know if there's anything for transforming on the chart. I don't think so. I mean, it could represent that you feel like you're undergoing some massive personal change. Certainly the sugar probably wouldn't have helped with your nightmares in general, but the fact, I mean, there's no association between sugar and turning into a horse. I don't know, maybe sugar cubes, but it's probably more just like the physiological effects of the sucrose, I think, is what they're getting at there. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, like, the easiest interpretation is that it's some massive personal change that you're expecting. The other thing is that it was kind of interesting to me is that the dream sort of starts with you pulling up next to a horse field where there's horses presumably like grazing next to you, and then you say that the dream becomes third person after you transform into a horse. So the other thought that I had that was kind of an interesting idea is, what if you're like showing up to your own dream at the start and at the end, like it's a looping dream. The horse in the field at the beginning of the dream is you, and then maybe you have like a false awakening, and then there you are going to the lake house again, and all of a sudden there's you as a horse. You watch it for 30 minutes and then you turn into it, and then the dream repeats. That'd be interesting. Or you're invading someone else's dream and they're the horse, and then it's your turn to be the horse and someone else comes along and watches you. Just fun thinking. I really have no idea how to interpret this, I'm sorry. Yeah, but very interesting dream. Wanted to read that. This is a post by a user named Post Maybales. The title is A Nightmare That Has Me Effed Up. The post reads, "In my nightmare I had 2 nights ago, I was walking with a group of people around a campground trying to find somewhere to pitch our tent, and we walked up to a cornfield with a huge tree right in front of it. It was relatively dark, but not dark enough to where we couldn't see. We put up something that wasn't a tent, but was more like a big piece of plastic to cover an area to lay under. All I remember next was being in pitch black, and then a light on me, laying in a circle, and people chanting in satanic verses. Then I was in an insane amount of pain and realized my blood was being drawn out of my body. My body was aching. It was horrible and extremely painful. It was almost like I was outside my body, watching, and every single thing, as blood was being taken, I was turning translucent. Then the satanic verses stopped, and my blood came rushing back to my body. It only took minutes to leave, and minutes to come back. When finally it all came back so fast that I started shouting..." Let me try that again. "When it finally all came back, I sat up so fast and started shouting satanic verses at the huge dark figure who moved into the light. It was Satan. He was all black, with a huge thick goat hooves and horns. He was terrifying. Before I woke up, all he said was welcome. Then I jolted awake and woke up my husband. I had the exact same dream 3 times in a row." I don't know. Well, actually, one of the new additions to my interpretation chart was about blood. So, blood is one of those ones that can have a lot of meanings. And in fact, I think that a lot of the meanings that it can have, in addition to those meanings, it can also mean nothing at all. It can just be, the representation of a bad thing happening to you. But in general, if there's a lot of blood in a dream, or the dream heavily relates around blood, that would indicate some sort of life change. But what's interesting is the blood leaves your body and then comes back. So maybe there was some event that almost was a dramatic life-changing event, and then it didn't happen. Or maybe you feel like it could, but you're teetering on the brink of that life change, potentially. In terms of the chanting and Satan, I mean, I don't have anything for that on, anything that I've read. I mean, that would have to be interpretation by hand. But I don't know. Just kind of freaky. Satanic verses refers to words of satanic suggestion, which the Islamic prophet Muhammad is alleged to have mistaken for divine revelation. Somehow I feel like that's not really coming into play in this context, but I appreciate that remark. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe there's just something freaky going on, and you're then tying that into a life change. That's a tough one, though. Whenever stuff gets like real crazy like that, I don't blame you for being effed up there. All right, one more from Reddit, and then we're back to our nightmares, by the way, but we're gonna do one more from Reddit, and then I'm gonna read our user submitted nightmare. This is a post by a user named strange_hearing2455. The post is titled, "I think I experienced hell, but I'm not sure." The post reads, "Let me preface by saying 1. This is the second time I have had a dream like this. Not exact dream, but a similar one. And 2, I am religious, which may explain a lot of the religious undertones. The first time I had a dream like this was 4 months ago. It started relatively normal. My girlfriend and I were watching TV. and a really old commercial came on advertising a house. It turns out that the house that was being advertised was my house, and it wasn't scary at the time. It was just cool to me to see the way my house looked whenever the commercial was made. Then, suddenly, I was outside my house, alone, except it wasn't my house, but I still recognized it as my own, if that makes any sense. I was wandering around the halls and came upon my brother's room. The door was slightly cracked, which I thought was odd, and as I got closer, I could see that there was a massive fire on the inside. I started to get close, and I felt this awful presence come over me. I started chanting, "God protect me, God protect me," as I tried to pull the door closed. I kept pulling, and it wouldn't shut. Finally, I gave a really hard tug, and I can't remember if the door closed, but I was launched backwards into the driver's seat of my car, and suddenly I was driving on the road leading to my girlfriend's house. It was all normal, and I was listening to music, but as I kept going, it started snowing lightly, then heavily. It got to the point where I could barely see, and all of a sudden, the music I was listening to morphed into this horrendous screeching and shouting. It was literally the most terrifying and horrible sound I've ever heard in my life. Insert band joke here. And I could tell it wasn't human. I felt my body start to lift up and leave the car, and it started to veer off to the side of the road, and at this time I woke up sobbing uncontrollably. I've never been that scared in my life. It felt so real to me. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I'm not quite sure what to make of that either. I mean, the first part of the dream, I think, is easier to interpret from sort of the classical view, again, like Jungian dream interpretation, than the second part. The second part is just sort of freaky, and maybe it just ties into the first part. But again, as I've mentioned before, the house represents the self, and you're seeing the entirety of your psyche, that is, and you're seeing the self being advertised, interestingly. And then when you get to it, I assume what you appear in front of is the house from the commercial, and then it's not, something's off about it. It's not actually your house. It's warped somehow. It's twisted. Maybe the most direct interpretation of it, knowing that, is that maybe you feel like you present a false self to others, and when you're walking through it, you really don't like, you feel a bad presence. Is that how you said it? Sorry, I'm just going to check that again. Yeah, I felt this awful presence come over me. Maybe it means that you're, in dealing with people or a certain person, perhaps you're putting on this false sense of yourself that makes you feel bad about yourself. Maybe you're subjecting yourself to something, trying to be polite, and deep down that's really bothering you. Could be something like that, and that's why the feeling of the evil presence comes over you. Is it's a version of you that you don't want to be, and you feel like you have to be that. That's my interpretation. The second part, again, of the nightmare is more difficult. Everything's going normal, and then all of a sudden, the music, all of the pleasant things become unpleasant. I was just trying to understand the dream. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to put down your remark, Elle. I was just bouncing that idea off myself, and then, yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't know if you experienced hell either, but it is an interesting nightmare. And now we have a lovely long dream here from our friend Michelle, which she's submitted some nightmares to me before, and I'm always happy to read viewer submitted nightmares. If you want to submit one yourself, send it to theforgottengrove@gmail.com. But let's get into this nightmare from Michelle. So the title of this is Prophecy Number 5. The dream was in some 17th century underground prison. The walls were made of yellow rock. The bars from the cells were made of black metal and were broken. I was floating around like a spirit, and I was not the only spirit there. As I fluttered around, I saw a huge brown African mask on the wall, which was looking at me like, "I'm keeping my eyes on you," and it scared me a lot. Excuse me. Then, I noticed two guys on the ground talking to each other. They were not spirits. One of them had gray Einstein hair and a brown professor coat. Well, that's probably not really what it's called, but I guess you get the picture. Maybe like a tweed jacket or something. And for some reason, I thought he was American. The other guy had black hair and brownish skin color. For some reason, I thought he was Portuguese. They looked concerned about something. They were talking about prophecies. They knew the first 4 prophecies, and so did I when I woke up, but I didn't remember them, because I never thought about them. They didn't know the 5th prophecy, though, which was a problem. I don't know why it was, but I didn't really care. I did know the 5th prophecy, because for some reason, I knew a lot of random stuff in that dream. It was accessible to me, like there was a Google search option in my head, so I kind of looked it up and told them. At first, they ignored me and didn't take me seriously, as if they saw spirits like me all the time. Then, I started telling them the 5th prophecy, and they were really surprised. I told them, "It's going to happen in The Hague." That's all I said. Then the dream became more dreamlike, and I started to recite lines I had heard from a show I watched, Under the Dome, which was, "Pink stars are falling," with lots of pauses in between. The guys looked at me as if I'd gone crazy, and I disappeared into the ground. That's why I woke up. That's when I woke up. In the second dream, so there's 2 dreams here, and they're related to each other. In the second dream, I was sent to a town to give this prophecy to a church. I was not religious or related to God or to their God in any way, but I knew they would perceive me as such if I went there. I knew the prophecy partly because I remembered the last dream and thought something like, "Oh, so this is how I knew about it," but also because it was my job to deliver it. So here it is: the church, the prophecy, and the devil. The dream started in this old, dark, rather cold-looking town. I'm not sure how a town can look cold exactly, but this one did. Just walking around in it would give you chills, but I wasn't scared in any way in the dream. In the square of the town, there was a huge iron cage with nothing in it. I mean big, like taller than the church, at least as big as a house. It wouldn't hold anything, as the bars were quite far apart. I believe they were building it as art of some kind, and they were still constructing it. A lot of people were working on it at the time that I entered the town. I was definitely interested, but I couldn't stick around too long. I walked around the town a bit before heading to my destination. I went to the church, and entered a church, which was rather large on the inside. It had a red carpet on the floor, and I was walking on, and the church itself was formed in a weird way. It was like it was a square of hallways with a larger room on one of the sides instead of a hallway, where the actual church was. In this room, there were wooden benches people sit on to listen to stuff, and on the right room were large benches where you could wait for someone to listen to your confession. They were open, and you could see each other, and actually everyone else was in the church too. They weren't private in any way, but it still felt comfortable and safe for some reason. I did not have a confession anyway, since I'm not a Christian. And I was aware of that in the dream as well. I merely came to the church out of curiosity, but of what it looked like on the inside. But I also speak to someone from the church and to warn them, because I knew that the warning was important to them. Also, it had been literally my job to tell them this, although I have no idea who gave it to me and why. that task. I told the man who came to listen to me about the fifth prophecy, or prophecy number 5, as it had been referred to in the previous dream, about the fact that something was going to happen in the Hague. This place obviously wasn't the Hague, which I knew in the dream, but then thought, well, I'm telling him this, the prophecy about the Hague, and I know it's important to him. So I guess this must be the Hague after all. Although I guess it makes sense, even if this place wasn't the Hague, it could still matter to them. I guess what I realized later is that perhaps there were 5 prophecies, each told a different type of institution or specific person, or something that somehow had to be combined at a certain point in time. The full prophecy could not have been known before that time, so they had to be told separately. Somehow the prophecies would come together when they were meant to. I guess something may have gone wrong in this case, as the 5th prophecy was lost, but in this dream, I kind of felt like it had to happen, like it was fate of this town to be destroyed, or a different reason, and therefore the prophecy was destined to be lost. Anyway, after I told the guy who listened to me about the prophecy, I kind of felt weird, like something was off, but I ignored it and walked back through the same halls I came through before. On one of the benches, the church visitors saw an evil-looking man with milky white eyes. I knew that this man was the devil. I saw him as the same devil the Christians believe in, but it was a coincidence that they knew about him, like he was an evil existence who someone had happened to come across someday, and who someone incorporated into the Christian religion. I knew he was going to do something really bad, but I didn't feel like I should do something about it. It was none of my business. Maybe more like I wasn't from this world. Yeah, that's what I said. And therefore wasn't supposed to directly intervene with what was going to happen to them. I entered another hallway, where I heard screams and commotion in that hallway I had just come from, where the devil had been. I knew I had to get away, although I was still not very impressed or in a hurry or anything. The hallway I was in had a room with a secret passage in it, which I and everyone who was in the room or hallway at that moment knew about instantly, and entered without hesitation or surprise. I knew everyone who was left behind in the church would not make it out alive. We exited the secret passage on the slope of the mountain, where everyone just stood dazed and watched in the direction of the town. A guy who looked like a leader, looked like he was about to give an important speech, and the remaining inhabitants of the town. I'm not sure what he was going to talk about, or what they were going to do next, but I had nothing to do with them, so I flew off the mountain into the town again. The town was empty and quiet. When I turned around to look at people on the mountain, I saw a huge shadow flying away from the town. I knew it was the devil I had met in the church, leaving the town. I knew the remaining town members were going to be all right, as the devil's job was now finished. I wasn't angry with him at all. All I thought was, I guess everyone has something good and something bad inside them. I guess I do too. Because at that moment, I realized I hadn't exactly been the hero of the story either. Something I didn't really mind either. I just realized he was just doing his job too. We cannot always do what's right in the eyes of others, as sometimes it's simply not what is meant to happen. I guess humans aren't supposed to see that, though, which is why I couldn't interfere. Why I knew he had to do what he had to do, just like I did, and that's why I wasn't angry. But also, why I knew the town was supposed to hate him for it. Creatures like us didn't have a sense of good and bad. We simply did what needed to be done, even if no one was going to thank us for it. I looked around one last time. The town was still looking cold and weird in the same way it did when I entered, but so much quieter. I knew my work was done, and it was time to leave, so I walked towards the gate of the town, as if to exit this realm, like a perfect end to a story. Right when I reached it, I woke up. And another thing that I should have mentioned about this story is she mentioned that she was sort of inspired by the topic last week about the feeling of the dreams in the ancient world. And I could feel a bit of those vibes in this dream as well. in terms of interpretation, I mean, there's definitely a lot going on there. In the second part, though, I mean, maybe there's something that you had felt guilty about for a long time, and then you forgave yourself for it later on. That's sort of the most simple one. There's like a lot to unpack there, though, and I went a bit over time, unfortunately. So, yeah, but yeah, just to go back to that initial point, like maybe you felt like you're forgiving yourself for something that you previously was weighing you down, because you recognize at the end of the dream that you're just doing what you had to do, and that's also what the devil's doing. So maybe it's a happy ending. Probably a lab coat. I think that's referring to maybe the tweed jacket, the professor coat. I don't know. I feel like lab coat is a distinct thing, though. But anyway, thank you for joining me, and thanks for sending that email, Michelle. I've been Sandor Desmond with the Forgotten Grove, and of course this has been Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. Subscribe and hit the bell so that you find out when I go live next week, and for my Thursday horror videos if you're into those. And until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.